Hold on, because what you're about to hear will completely shock you. A woman abandoned while carrying twins, a husband who walked away. But here's what nobody expected, who came to save her when she had absolutely nothing. Wait until the end, because the truth will blow your mind. Before we start, please hit that subscribe button and smash the like button to see more unbelievable stories like this one. This story is about to change everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and redemption. Sarah thought she had it all. She was married to Marcus, a successful businessman who seemed like the perfect husband for 5 years. They lived in a beautiful home, attended the right events, and everyone envied their relationship. But Sarah had a secret dream. She wanted to start a family. She had always imagined what it would be like to hold her own children, to build a legacy with the man she loved. One morning, after months of hoping, Sarah took a pregnancy test with trembling hands. 2 lines appeared. Her heart raced with pure joy. But when she looked more carefully at the screen, something unexpected happened. There were 2 pregnancy indicators showing up. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. She called her doctor immediately, desperate to understand what she was seeing. The doctor confirmed what she already suspected. She was carrying twins, fraternal twins, 2 beautiful babies on the way. Sarah felt like she was floating. She imagined telling Marcus the news, seeing his face light up with the same excitement she felt. That night, she prepared a special dinner, candles and everything. She had even purchased 2 tiny baby outfits to reveal the news in the most romantic way possible. When Marcus arrived home from work, Sarah's hands were shaking with anticipation. She led him to the dining room where everything was perfectly arranged. Marcus immediately seemed uncomfortable, almost irritated by the effort she had made. "Sarah, what is all this?" he asked coldly. Her smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the reaction she had imagined. She took a deep breath and held out the 2 baby outfits. "Marcus, we're going to be parents. We're having twins," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. The room went silent. Marcus stared at the outfits in her hands, and his expression changed from confusion to something darker. Anger. Pure, unmistakable anger flooded his face. "Are you serious right now?" He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. "This is the worst possible timing. Do you have any idea what's happening with my business right now? I have enormous deals coming through. I cannot be responsible for 2 children. Sarah's heart began to break. This wasn't her Marcus. This wasn't the man who had promised to love her forever. "Marcus, please. I know this is unexpected, but we can manage this together," she pleaded, tears beginning to stream down her face. "I'm not managing anything," he said coldly. "You should have been more careful. You should have planned this better." "I don't want this, Sarah. I don't want them." Those words hit her like a physical blow. Her own husband was rejecting not only her but their unborn children. Over the following weeks, Marcus became increasingly distant and cruel. He would come home late, avoid any conversation about the pregnancy, and when he did speak to Sarah, his words were harsh and dismissive. He made it clear that he resented her for getting pregnant and blamed her entirely for upending his life. Sarah tried to reason with him, tried to make him understand that these babies were their children, but Marcus seemed to have completely shut down emotionally. Then, one devastating day, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He came home with papers in his hand and sat across from Sarah with absolutely no emotion in his eyes. "I'm leaving," he stated flatly. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. You can keep the house, but I want no involvement with the children. None. I'm signing away all parental rights." Sarah felt the ground beneath her disappear. She couldn't even speak. Before she could process what he was saying, Marcus continued, "I'm also cutting you off financially. I'm restructuring everything so that you won't have access to our joint accounts. You wanted this life. Now you can live with the consequences." He stood up and walked toward the door. Sarah found her voice, begging him to reconsider, but he never looked back. He left her standing alone in that beautiful house that suddenly felt like a prison. Days turned into weeks, and the reality of Sarah's situation became increasingly desperate. Without Marcus's income, the mortgage payments became impossible. The medical bills for her pregnancy were mounting. She had no family support. Her parents had passed away years ago, and she had been isolated from most of her friendships because of how demanding Marcus had been. She was completely alone, carrying twins, with no financial support and no one to turn to. By her 7th month of pregnancy, Sarah made the most difficult decision of her life. She sold the house and used the money to rent a small apartment in a different city, somewhere Marcus wouldn't think to look for her. She wanted to disappear, to give birth to her children in peace, and to figure out how to survive on her own. The day Sarah left that city, she felt like she was abandoning everything she had known. But she also felt something else, a small spark of hope. She didn't know where this journey would lead her, but she knew that her twins deserved better than the rejection they had already experienced. As she drove toward her new life, Sarah had absolutely no idea that her path was about to intersect with someone unexpected, someone whose own life had been marked by loss, by pain, and by the kind of loneliness that only comes when you lose everything. This person was about to become Sarah's greatest protector, her unlikely savior, and the key to a future she could never have imagined. Everything was about to change in ways Sarah could never predict. When Sarah arrived at her new city, She was 7 months pregnant, frightened, and completely alone. She found a small studio apartment in a modest neighborhood and tried her best to prepare for the arrival of her twins. She worked at a local cafe, waiting tables and trying to save every penny she could for medical expenses and baby supplies. Her co-workers were kind enough, but Sarah never told them her story. She kept everyone at a distance, too afraid that somehow Marcus would find her. Then, one rainy evening in her 8th month of pregnancy, something unexpected happened. Sarah was walking home from her shift, her swollen belly making every step uncomfortable. The street was dimly lit, and most of the stores around her were closing for the night. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain shoot through her lower abdomen. She gasped, clutching her stomach as another wave of pain washed over her. She knew immediately that something was wrong. Contractions had started too early. Sarah tried to call an ambulance, but in her panic, she fumbled with her phone and it slipped from her hands, falling into a nearby storm drain. She was alone, in pain, on a dark street with no way to call for help. She stumbled toward the nearest building, which turned out to be an old community center that was supposed to be closed. But the door was slightly ajar, and Sarah pushed through it, desperate for shelter and help. Inside the building, she found someone she never expected to meet. There was a woman probably in her early 70s sitting in the dim light of the community center. Her name was Eleanor, and she had been the director of this community center for the past 20 years before the city had decided to shut it down due to budget cuts. Eleanor had come back that evening to collect some personal items from her office when she heard Sarah's desperate cries for help. Without hesitation, Eleanor sprang into action. She had delivered 3 of her own children and had extensive experience with childbirth. She called for an ambulance while comforting Sarah, holding her hand through each contraction. Eleanor spoke to Sarah in calm, reassuring tones, telling her that everything would be okay, that she wasn't alone anymore. When the ambulance arrived, Eleanor rode with Sarah to the hospital, never leaving her side for a single moment. At the hospital, Sarah went through an extremely difficult labor. The twins were coming for weeks early, and her body was exhausted and terrified, but Eleanor stood beside her throughout the entire ordeal, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, and whispering words of encouragement. After 18 hours of intense labor, Sarah gave birth to 2 beautiful babies, a boy and a girl. She named them James and Lily. When Eleanor first held those babies and looked at Sarah's face, she saw something she recognized immediately: a woman at her absolute lowest point, a woman who had been abandoned and broken. Eleanor had experienced something similar in her own life. Decades ago, Eleanor had lost her own daughter in a terrible car accident. Her daughter had left behind a granddaughter that Eleanor had raised as her own. That granddaughter had grown up and moved away to pursue her career, leaving Eleanor alone with nothing but memories and an empty house. Losing her granddaughter had broken Eleanor's heart in ways she could never fully express. The loneliness had nearly consumed her. So when Eleanor looked at Sarah and her newborn twins, something awakened in her. She felt purpose returning to her life. Sarah, Eleanor said softly while holding baby Lily, "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. Do you have anywhere to go? Does anyone know you're here?" Sarah broke down completely. She told Eleanor everything. She told her about Marcus, about the rejection, about how she had sold her house and disappeared to escape him. She confessed that she had no family, no financial support, and absolutely no plan for how she was going to survive as a single mother to newborn twins. Eleanor listened to every word without interrupting. When Sarah finished, tears streaming down her face, Eleanor made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. "You're not going anywhere," Eleanor said firmly. "Those babies need stability, and you need help. I have a house, it's paid off and it's empty. You're going to come home with me, and we're going to figure this out together." Sarah was stunned. She had never experienced such kindness from a stranger. "I can't accept that," she protested weakly, but Eleanor would hear none of it. "You can and you will," Eleanor said. "I've lost too much in my life, Sarah. I've learned that when the universe gives you a second chance to matter to someone, you take it, you don't question it, you do it." So Sarah and her twins went home with Eleanor. The first few weeks were surreal. Sarah was healing from childbirth, exhausted from caring for newborns, and emotionally traumatized from everything that had happened to her. But Eleanor was there for every moment. She helped with midnight feedings. She rocked the babies to sleep. She held Sarah when she cried. She cooked nutritious meals and made sure Sarah was taking care of herself. Slowly, Sarah began to heal. She began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she and her children were going to be okay. But what Sarah didn't know was that her peace was about to be shattered by an unexpected revelation. One evening, as Eleanor was helping put the twins down for bed, Sarah received a phone call that made her blood run cold. It was a lawyer's office. They had been trying to track her down for weeks. The reason they were calling was about Marcus, and it involved something that would change everything. Sarah thought she knew about her situation. The lawyer's message was cryptic but urgent. He explained that there had been a significant development in Sarah's case, a case she didn't even know existed. Apparently, Marcus had been involved in some kind of financial scandal at his company. The SEC was investigating him for fraud and embezzlement. His assets had been frozen, and he was facing serious federal charges. More importantly, the court had appointed someone to manage his financial affairs during the investigation. That someone had discovered evidence that Marcus had fraudulently moved marital assets before disappearing from Sarah's life. According to the law, Sarah was entitled to a substantial portion of those assets. The lawyer informed her that there was a settlement waiting for her that would provide financial security for her and her children for years to come. Sarah's hands trembled as she processed this information. She had thought Marcus had left her with nothing, but in reality there was justice waiting for her all along. She just hadn't known to look for it. When she told Eleanor the news, tears of gratitude streamed down both their faces. Eleanor held Sarah tightly. "Do you see?" Eleanor whispered. "The universe takes care of those who deserve it. You're going to be okay, more than okay. Your children are going to thrive." But here's where the story takes another unexpected turn. As Sarah was preparing to receive this settlement, she made a discovery that would challenge everything she believed about who she could trust. She was sorting through some old documents when she found something that had been hidden in a drawer in Eleanor's house. It was a newspaper clipping from decades ago. The headline read, "Local businessman charged with abandonment and fraud," and in the accompanying photo was a much younger version of Eleanor. Sarah's heart began to race. She read the article carefully. Decades ago, Eleanor's husband had done nearly the exact same thing that Marcus had done. He had abandoned Eleanor when she was pregnant with their second child. He had moved money around, hidden assets, and tried to leave Eleanor destitute. Eleanor had fought back legally and had won, eventually receiving a settlement that had allowed her to raise her children and build the life she had. Eleanor had experienced almost identical betrayal to what Sarah had endured. When Sarah confronted her about the article, Eleanor didn't deny it. She sat down at the kitchen table, and with tears in her eyes, she told Sarah her story. "I never told you because I didn't want you to feel like I was trying to be your savior," Eleanor explained. "I didn't want you to think that helping you was about me reliving my own trauma. But the truth is, when I found you that night, broken and terrified on that street, I saw myself in you. I saw the version of myself that had been abandoned and humiliated, and I made a promise that I would do everything in my power to make sure your story ended differently than mine did." Sarah realized in that moment that Eleanor's help wasn't born from pity, it was born from understanding. Eleanor knew exactly what Sarah was going through because she had lived it. And more importantly, Eleanor had survived it and thrived. Eleanor had converted her pain into purpose and had used her own redemption to help Sarah find hers. But the story doesn't end there. Because just when Sarah thought her life was finally stabilizing, when she thought the worst was behind her, something happened that would once again shake the foundation of everything she believed about the people around her. Eleanor received a phone call from someone she hadn't heard from in nearly 2 decades. It was her granddaughter, the one who had left Eleanor alone all those years ago. The granddaughter had seen a news story online about a settlement being awarded to a woman named Sarah with newborn twins. In the article, there was a photograph of Eleanor and Sarah together. Eleanor's granddaughter recognized her grandmother immediately and realized what had happened. She had abandoned Eleanor for so long, pursuing her own career, assuming her grandmother was fine without her. But seeing Eleanor in that photograph, surrounded by love and purpose, stirred something in her granddaughter's heart. She realized how much time she had wasted, how much of her grandmother's later years she had missed. Eleanor's granddaughter made a decision. She decided to move back to the city where her grandmother lived. She quit her prestigious job and uprooted her entire life to be near Eleanor again. When Eleanor's granddaughter arrived at the house and saw Eleanor holding baby James while Eleanor's own great-grandchild looked on with wonder in her eyes, something profound shifted in everyone's hearts. Eleanor's granddaughter realized that her grandmother had never stopped loving her, had never held her absence against her, and Eleanor realized that her granddaughter had finally come home. The reunion was emotional and powerful. Eleanor's granddaughter apologized for abandoning her grandmother, for not being present during the years when Eleanor needed her most. Eleanor forgave her immediately, as she had forgiven so much in her life. And then Eleanor did something that would cement the bond between all these broken people who had somehow found their way to each other. Eleanor decided to legally adopt James and Lily as her great-grandchildren. She made it official and binding, ensuring that her legacy would continue through these children. She wanted Sarah to know that these babies weren't just being helped by her, they were part of her family now, permanently and irrevocably. When Eleanor made the decision to legally adopt James and Lily, Sarah broke down in the most profound way. She hadn't just lost a man who was supposed to protect her, she had gained a family, a real family. A family not built on blood alone, but on choice, on sacrifice, and on genuine love. The adoption papers were signed on a Tuesday afternoon in the family court. Eleanor, her granddaughter, and Sarah all stood together as the judge made it official. James and Lily were now legally part of Eleanor's family. They had a great-grandmother who loved them fiercely, an aunt who had come back to be present in their lives, and a mother who had survived the unimaginable. Sarah looked at Eleanor and realized something profound. She had entered Eleanor's life as a broken woman seeking shelter, but Eleanor had seen something in her from the very beginning: potential resilience. and the capacity to love deeply. Eleanor had believed in Sarah when Sarah didn't believe in herself. With the settlement money from Marcus's fraud case and Eleanor's support, Sarah was able to transform her life completely. She enrolled in college to pursue a degree in social work, inspired by Eleanor's decades of service to her community. She wanted to dedicate her life to helping other women like her, women who had been abandoned, betrayed, and left alone to fend for themselves. Eleanor's granddaughter started working at a local non-profit that helped families in crisis. She found herself drawn to helping women in situations similar to Sarah's, driven by the empathy that came from watching her grandmother's incredible act of compassion. The three women, Eleanor, Sarah, and Eleanor's granddaughter, began working together to create a support network for abandoned and pregnant women. They founded a small organization called New Beginnings, which provided financial assistance, housing, legal support, and emotional counseling to women facing similar circumstances to what Sarah had endured. The organization grew beyond anyone's expectations. Women from all over the city began hearing about Sarah's story, about how Eleanor had saved her, about how broken people could come together and build something beautiful. Other volunteers started joining the cause, people who had experienced their own betrayals, their own abandoned dreams, their own moments of absolute despair. They all came together to help others find their way back to hope. 2 years after Sarah first met Eleanor, she graduated from college with her degree in social work. Eleanor sat in the front row of the auditorium, holding baby James on one side and baby Lily on the other. As Sarah walked across the stage to receive her diploma, Eleanor couldn't hold back her tears. She was witnessing the transformation of a woman who had been on the verge of complete destruction. She was witnessing proof that compassion and kindness could literally save lives. But here's where the story takes one final, completely unexpected turn. Because sometimes, life has a way of completing circles in the most beautiful and surprising ways possible. One evening, as Sarah was working at one of the New Beginnings support centers, a woman came through the door in absolute distress. She was pregnant, frightened, and seemed to be in immediate danger. Sarah immediately began the intake process, trying to understand the woman's situation so she could help her. As the woman started to tell her story, Sarah's face went pale. The woman's description of her husband, his business, his demeanor, the way he had treated her sounded eerily familiar. As Sarah asked more questions, the truth became undeniably clear. The woman was describing someone who had been to prison, someone who had been convicted of fraud and embezzlement, someone named Marcus. It was Marcus's new wife. Marcus had married again after divorcing Sarah, and just like he had done to Sarah, he was now doing to this new woman, rejecting her, abandoning her, leaving her alone and pregnant without financial support. The new wife was carrying his child, and he was treating her with the same cruelty and dismissal he had shown Sarah. When Sarah heard this, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. She felt anger that Marcus was repeating his pattern of abuse with yet another woman, but she also felt something else. She felt purpose. He felt called to help this woman in a way that only someone who had lived through the exact same betrayal could do. Sarah didn't judge this woman. She didn't say, "I told you so," or express any resentment. Instead, she looked the woman in the eyes with profound compassion and said, "I know exactly what you're going through. I've been where you are, and I want you to know that you're going to be okay. Not because this is easy, because it's not, but because you're not alone anymore. I'm here, and I'm going to help you build a new life." Sarah helped Marcus's new wife get emergency legal representation. She connected her with the resources of New Beginnings. She ensured that she had a safe place to stay while she was pregnant. And when the baby was born, a healthy baby girl, Sarah was there for the birth, just like Eleanor had been there for hers. In that moment, Sarah understood the full cycle of what Eleanor had started. Eleanor had saved her so that she could save others. Eleanor's act of compassion had created a ripple effect that would touch countless lives. And the most beautiful part was that Sarah was now able to break the cycle of abandonment by being the person she had needed when she was at her lowest point. Eleanor watched all of this from a distance with immense pride. She saw Sarah becoming the woman that Eleanor had always believed she could be. And Eleanor knew that her own life, the abandonment she had suffered decades ago, had ultimately served a greater purpose. It had allowed her to recognize Sarah's pain and respond with the kind of compassion that only comes from having survived something similar yourself. By the 3rd year after Sarah and Eleanor met, New Beginnings had helped over 200 women. 200 women who had been abandoned, betrayed, or left alone during pregnancy had received support, shelter, legal assistance, and most importantly, the message that they were not alone. 200 women had been told by Sarah or Eleanor as granddaughter or one of the many volunteers that they deserved better, that their babies deserved better, and that there was a future worth fighting for. Sarah's twins, James and Lily, were now healthy, thriving 5-year-olds. They called Eleanor grandma and Eleanor's granddaughter aunt. They lived in a home filled with love and purpose. They saw their mother working tirelessly to help others. They understood, in the way that young children understand such things, that their family was different, that it had been built not by accident but by choice and by the power of compassion to transform lives. And somewhere in the city, Marcus sat in a federal prison cell, serving time for his crimes. He had lost everything: his fortune, his freedom, and his ability to hurt anyone else. The man who had rejected his own children, who had tried to leave Sarah destitute, had ultimately received justice. Not because Sarah had sought revenge, but because the universe, in its own way, had a reckoning for those who betray others so cruelly. Sarah never felt satisfaction in Marcus's downfall. She had moved beyond anger into something more powerful. Forgiveness, not forgiveness that excused his behavior, but forgiveness that freed her from the burden of carrying his cruelty in her heart. She had learned from Eleanor that holding on to bitterness only poisoned the container it was held in, and Sarah had chosen to use her pain as fuel for purpose instead of fuel for revenge. This is where we arrive at the profound truth of Sarah's story. She came to Eleanor as a woman who had lost everything. She left as a woman who had gained everything that truly mattered: a family, a purpose, the knowledge that she was worthy of love and respect, and the power to extend that same compassion to others. Eleanor came into Sarah's life as a woman living with the loss of her granddaughter and the echoes of her own abandonment. She left having rebuilt her family and having created a legacy of compassion that would extend far beyond her own lifetime. Eleanor's granddaughter came home having finally understood what mattered, having finally recognized that career success meant nothing compared to being present for the people you love. And together, these three women, broken by their circumstances, but not broken permanently, had created something beautiful. They had created a new beginning, not just for themselves, but for countless others. This is the power of compassion. This is the power of refusing to let your pain define your future. And this is the incredible true story of how one woman's terrible tragedy became another woman's salvation, and how that salvation ultimately became the foundation for helping hundreds more. If this story has moved you, please hit that subscribe button right now and smash that like button to support this channel and see more incredible stories like this one. Share this story with anyone in your life who needs to know that there is hope after abandonment, that there is light after darkness, and that the people who save us often come from the most unexpected places. Your support means everything to us. Thank you for watching until the end of this incredible journey. We'll see you in the next story. The night before the formal opening of the New Beginnings Center, Sarah couldn't sleep. She walked through the empty rooms one more time, touching the walls, imagining all the women who would walk through these doors seeking refuge and support. Eleanor found her sitting in the main counseling room, staring out the window into the quiet street below. Couldn't sleep? Eleanor asked, settling into the chair beside her. I keep thinking about where I would be without you, Sarah whispered. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. I don't know if I would have survived this. Eleanor took Sarah's hand. You would have survived, Eleanor said firmly, because that's who you are. That's who you've always been underneath the pain and the fear. I didn't save you, Sarah. I just reminded you that you were capable of saving yourself. The opening day of New Beginnings arrived with sunshine and hope. Women began arriving, some desperate, some broken, some on the verge of complete collapse. Sarah and Eleanor greeted each one with the understanding that only comes from having walked in their shoes themselves. A young woman named Jasmine was one of the first to walk through the doors. She was 6 months pregnant, had been thrown out of her home by her family for having a child out of wedlock, and was living in her car. When Sarah first spoke to her, Jasmine was so broken that she could barely speak. She believed her life was over, that her baby would be born into a situation of homelessness and despair with no way out. Sarah looked at this woman and saw herself. She saw the terror in her eyes, the hopelessness in her posture, the absolute conviction that she was beyond saving. Sarah took Jasmine's hands and looked directly into her eyes. I was where you are, Sarah said, abandoned, pregnant, and absolutely convinced that there was no way forward. But I'm going to tell you something that someone once told me, and it changed everything. You are stronger than you think. Your baby is stronger than you think. And there are people in this world who will help you, not because they have to, but because they choose to, because they understand. I'm one of those people. Let me help you. Jasmine broke down and cried. She had expected judgment. She had expected rejection. Instead, she had found understanding. Within weeks, Jasmine had safe housing, prenatal care, and a plan for after her baby was born. She enrolled in job training while Eleanor watched her during her appointments. By the time Jasmine gave birth to a healthy baby boy, she had hope in her heart. She had a job waiting for her, a supportive community, and the knowledge that she wasn't alone. Eleanor's granddaughter had become the director of operations for New Beginnings. She had discovered her true calling in helping vulnerable women, and she threw herself into the work with absolute dedication. She found herself drawn to the women who seemed the most broken, the most convinced that their situation was hopeless. She recognized in them the same desperation that had driven her to leave her grandmother for so long, that belief that somewhere else held more meaning, more purpose than where you currently were. Eleanor's granddaughter began to understand that real purpose was unfound in climbing corporate ladders or achieving material success. It was found in moments like the one when Jasmine first held her baby boy and whispered, "We're going to be okay. We're going to be okay." 6 months into operating New Beginnings, Eleanor and Sarah received a letter that shook them both deeply. It was from a woman named Patricia, one of the first women they had helped. Patricia had been in an abusive relationship, pregnant, and completely isolated when she came to New Beginnings. Eleanor and Sarah had helped her escape her situation, get legal protection, and rebuild her life. Patricia had moved to another state to get distance from her abusive ex. She had started a new job, made new friends, and had given birth to a daughter in safety and peace. In her letter, Patricia wrote, "Every single day of my daughter's life, I tell her about the people who saved us. I tell her about Eleanor and Sarah and how they believed in me when I could unbelieve in myself. My daughter will grow up knowing that when people are in darkness, there are always people willing to light the way. That's the legacy I'm giving her. A legacy of hope, a legacy of knowing that goodness exists in the world. Thank you for changing our lives." When Eleanor read that letter, she wept openly. Sarah held her grandmother's hand and understood in that moment something fundamental about the impact of what they were doing. They weren't just changing lives in the present moment, they were creating entire new futures. They were influencing the way that Patricia's daughter would see the world, the way she would treat others, the values she would pass down to her own children someday. Eleanor and Sarah were creating a ripple effect of compassion that would extend through generations. As the first year of New Beginnings came to a close, the organization had helped over 250 women, but more than that, they had helped 500 children. 500 babies and children who had been born into uncertainty but were now being raised by mothers who had hope, who had resources, who had been given a second chance. Eleanor decided to host a special event to celebrate the success of New Beginnings and to thank everyone who had contributed to its mission. She invited every woman they had helped, every volunteer, every donor. On the evening of the celebration, the community center was filled with over 300 people, women with their babies and children, volunteers who had given their time and energy, donors who had believed in the mission, social workers and lawyers and doctors who had all contributed to helping these women find their way forward. Eleanor stood at the front of the room and began to speak. She told her own story of abandonment. She told the story of how she had found Sarah on a dark street, pregnant and alone. She talked about how that single moment of compassion had transformed not just Sarah's life, but her own life and the lives of countless others. Eleanor spoke about the power of seeing someone's pain and choosing to do something about it. She spoke about how anyone in that room had the power to change someone else's life simply by choosing to see them, to believe in them, to stand with them in their darkest moment. When Eleanor finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Women who had been helped stood up and shared their stories. They talked about where they had been and where they were now. They talked about the babies they had almost lost to despair but had instead been able to raise with love and hope. They talked about dreams they had thought were impossible but had somehow become reality. Sarah stood beside Eleanor watching her grandmother inspire hundreds of people to believe in the power of compassion, and Sarah understood that this was Eleanor's true legacy. Not the house she lived in or the money she had accumulated, but the lives she had changed, the hope she had restored, the future she had given to so many people who had almost lost theirs. James and Lily, now 7 years old, ran around the community center, playing with other children whose lives had been saved by New Beginnings. They had no memory of the poverty and desperation that had nearly defined their early existence. They had only memories of being loved, of being safe, of having a family that believed in them. They were growing up with the knowledge that their great-grandmother was a hero, that their mother was someone who saved other people, that their extended family was built on the foundation of compassion and choice. Everything that Sarah and Eleanor had struggled through, every moment of pain and uncertainty, had been transformed into purpose and meaning. Marcus had been released from prison after serving his sentence. He had tried to contact Sarah a few times, seeking some kind of reconciliation or forgiveness. But Sarah had moved beyond the need for closure from him. She had found something far more powerful. She had found meaning through helping others. She had transformed her deepest pain into her greatest purpose. When we encounter stories like Sarah's, we are reminded of the fundamental goodness that exists in the human heart. We are reminded that when we choose compassion over judgment, when we choose to help instead of to ignore, we are capable of changing everything. We are reminded that sometimes the greatest gift we can give to someone is simply to believe in them when they can't believe in themselves. If Sarah's story has moved your heart, if it has inspired you to think about the ways you might be able to help someone in your own life who is struggling, then please hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel to see more incredible stories of survival, redemption, and the power of human compassion. Share this video with someone you know who needs to be reminded that there is hope, that there is help, and that the world is full of people like Eleanor who are willing to stand with you in your darkest moment. Your support means absolutely everything to us. Thank you for watching this entire story, and we will see you next time.